November 15, 2024, the Russian Federal Space Agency quietly declassified a set of documents from the 1985 Vega mission to Venus. Among the released materials was a single notation, handwritten in the margin of a technical report, dated June 18, 1985. It read, "Venus is inhabited. God help us." The note was unsigned, but archival records indicate it was written by Dr. Aleksandr Petrov, chief mission scientist for the Vega atmospheric probe program. Dr. Petrov took his own life on March 3, 1986. He was 42 years old. He was the third member of the Vega monitoring team to commit suicide within a year of the mission. This is the story of what the Vega balloons saw in the clouds of Venus, and why the footage was buried for nearly 40 years. In June 1985, the Soviet Union launched two identical spacecraft, Vega 1 and Vega 2, on a dual mission to Venus and Halley's Comet. The Venus portion of the mission was ambitious: deploy atmospheric balloon probes that would drift through the planet's thick cloud layers, measuring temperature, pressure, wind speed, and chemical composition. Venus is hell. Surface temperature hot enough to melt lead. Atmospheric pressure 90 times that of Earth. Clouds made of sulfuric acid. The Soviet Union had been trying to explore Venus since the 1960s, landing multiple probes that survived mere minutes before being crushed and incinerated. But the clouds, the thick, opaque cloud layers that shroud Venus from 50 to 70 kilometers above the surface, those were theoretically survivable. Cooler, lower pressure, still corrosive, but manageable with the right materials. The Vega balloons were 3.4 meters in diameter, filled with helium, carrying instrument packages designed to broadcast data back to Earth for at least 48 hours as they drifted with Venus's fierce atmospheric currents. They were deployed on June 11th and June 15th, 1985. Both balloons functioned perfectly. Both transmitted data as expected. Temperature readings, wind measurements, pressure fluctuations, chemical analysis of the sulfuric acid clouds, and then, 36 hours into Vega 2's flight, the imaging system activated. The Vega balloons weren't designed for photography. The thick clouds made visual observation nearly useless, but each probe carried a simple optical sensor meant to measure cloud density and light penetration that could capture low-resolution images if conditions allowed. On June 16th at 14:22 Coordinated Universal Time, Vega 2's optical sensor recorded something. The mission control team in Moscow, a group of 15 scientists and engineers monitoring the telemetry feeds, watched the image resolve on their displays. At first, they thought it was a data error, compression artifacts, signal interference from the intense electromagnetic environment. But the image remained consistent across multiple transmission cycles, and it showed something that shouldn't exist. A structure. Massive. Geometric. Floating in the clouds of Venus. Dr. Petrov ordered the imaging system to capture additional frames. Over the next 6 hours, Vega 2 transmitted 17 images as it drifted through the cloud layer at an altitude of 54 kilometers. Each image showed the same thing. And each image made it worse. The structure was not a single object. It was a complex. Dozens of geometric forms, spheres, cylinders, polyhedrons, connected by what appeared to be filaments or bridges. Some components were kilometers across. Others, smaller, clustered like cells in tissue. The structures weren't solid. They appeared translucent, almost organic, built from materials that shifted and flowed within the corrosive atmosphere. They pulsed, expanded, and contracted, as if breathing. And they were moving. Not drifting with the wind. Moving with purpose, coordinating. responding to the Vega balloon's presence. One of the engineers, a woman named Irina Volkov, later described what she saw in testimony given to Soviet Internal Security Services. Her account was declassified along with the mission documents. The structures were aware of the probe, she said. We could see them orient toward it. Components of the complex shifted position, rearranging themselves. It was like watching neurons firing in a brain, or a city reorganizing its architecture in real time. We realized we weren't looking at buildings. We were looking at something alive. Dr. Petrov ordered continuous monitoring. The team worked in shifts, watching the telemetry feeds, analyzing the images, trying to understand what they were seeing. Soviet protocol required them to report significant discoveries to higher authorities, but Petrov delayed. He wanted more data, more certainty. The images kept coming. 18, 19, 20. The structures were growing larger in frame. The Vega balloon was drifting closer, carried by Venus's winds, or the structures were approaching the balloon. By June 17th, the optical sensor showed details that made interpretation impossible. The surfaces of the structures were covered in patterns, geometric designs that resembled circuitry or writing or something else entirely. They shifted constantly, reconfiguring, as if the structures were processing information on their skin. One of the younger scientists, a man named Dmitry Orlov, began to exhibit signs of psychological distress. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating. He spent every moment staring at the incoming images, muttering calculations under his breath. On June 18th, he had to be removed from the control room. He was found 3 hours later in the facility's bathroom, having carved geometric patterns into his forearms with a scalpel, patterns that matched the designs visible on the Venusian structures. He survived. Barely. But he never spoke coherently again. Spent the rest of his life in a psychiatric facility, drawing the same patterns over and over on any surface available. The Vega 2 balloon transmitted its 23rd image at 3:47 Coordinated Universal Time on June 18th. This image showed something different. A component of the structure, one of the larger spherical forms, had opened, or unfolded, or transformed. The optical sensor captured what appeared to be an interior space, hollow, vast, and inside. Dr. Petrov's handwritten note in the mission log, made at 4:15 Coordinated Universal Time. We should not be seeing this. This is not for human eyes. Recommend immediate termination of imaging system and cessation of all visual analysis. His request was denied. Moscow wanted more information, wanted to understand what the probe had discovered. The Cold War was at its height. If there was advanced technology on Venus, if there were resources or knowledge to be gained, the Soviet Union would claim it. The imaging system remained active. The optical sensor continued transmitting. Image 24 showed the interior of the open structure in greater detail. It was not empty. Something moved inside. Multiple somethings. Forms that defied description, not mechanical. Not organic in any sense that related to Earth biology. Something else. Something that existed in ways that three-dimensional imaging couldn't properly capture. Irina Volkov's testimony. It hurt to look at. Not physically, but mentally. Your brain couldn't process what the sensor was showing. The forms inside the structure seemed to occupy more space than should fit. Like looking at an Escher drawing, but real. Existing in our universe, but not following our geometry. 2 more team members had to leave the control room. One was vomiting. The other was crying. Not from fear. From confusion. From the cognitive dissonance of seeing something that shouldn't be possible. Image 25 arrived at 8:12 Coordinated Universal Time. The last image the Vega 2 balloon would transmit. It showed the structure fully opened, the interior completely visible, and emerging from that interior, approaching the Vega balloon with what could only be described as curiosity or interest, were entities. The declassified documents do not include this image. Of the 25 images transmitted by Vega 2's optical sensor, only the first 18 were released in November 2024. Images 19 through 25 remain classified at the highest levels of Russian state security. But transcripts of the Moscow control room communications were partially declassified. And in those transcripts at 8:14 Coordinated Universal Time, there is a recording of Dr. Petrov's voice. He is screaming. Not words, just sound, primal terror. Followed by silence. The Vega 2 balloon ceased all transmissions at 8:16 Coordinated Universal Time on June 18, 1985. Official records state the probe succumbed to the corrosive atmospheric conditions. Mission parameters exceeded. End of life. But the internal Soviet investigation concluded something different. The balloon's telemetry showed all systems functioning normally until the moment transmission stopped. No mechanical failure, no environmental damage. The probe simply went silent, instantly, completely, as if something had switched it off, or taken it. Dr. Aleksandr Petrov returned to work 3 days after the incident. He filed his technical reports, completed his analysis, gave no interviews, spoke to no one about what he had seen on those monitors. On March 3, 1986, he was found dead in his apartment. Suicide by overdose of sleeping medication. His final note read, "Some things should remain unknown. Some places should remain unvisited. Venus is not for us. It belongs to them. We should never return." 2 other members of the Vega monitoring team died within the year. One, a communications engineer named Boris Karenin, walked into traffic on a Moscow street. Witnesses said he was looking up at the sky, not at the oncoming vehicles. The other, a data analyst named Svetlana Morozov, was found in her home. She had suffocated herself with a plastic bag. Her apartment walls were covered in drawings, thousands of them, all depicting the same geometric patterns seen in the Vega images. Irina Volkov survived. She left the space program immediately after the mission, moved to rural Russia, refused all contact with former colleagues. In her declassified testimony, given in 1987 to investigators trying to understand the cluster of suicides, she said, "They were not hostile. That's what made it worse. They were not attacking. They were observing, studying, like we were insects that had wandered into their territory, and they were deciding what to do with us. The structures we saw were not buildings. They were bodies, or minds, or some combination we don't have words for. They live in Venus's clouds. They have lived there for longer than human civilization has existed, possibly longer than Earth has had multicellular life. They are aware. They are intelligent. But their intelligence is so different from ours that communication would be impossible. Like trying to explain color to a bacteria. The categories don't map. When Dmitri started carving those patterns into his skin, he said he finally understood. He said the patterns were language, but not language as we know it. Language that writes itself directly into consciousness, bypassing the need for symbols or syntax. He said they were trying to teach him. And it was breaking his mind, because human minds aren't structured to receive that kind of teaching. Volkov's final statement to investigators: "We should destroy all the Vega data, burn the images, erase the telemetry, pretend we saw nothing. Because if we look too closely at Venus, if we try to understand what lives there, we will break ourselves trying. Some knowledge is incompatible with human consciousness. The Venusians are that knowledge." The Soviet Union followed her advice. The Vega mission data was classified. The images were locked away. The suicide cluster was attributed to unrelated personal issues and work stress. The public received reports of successful atmospheric measurements and valuable scientific data about Venus's clouds. No mention of structures. No mention of entities. No mention of what the balloon had seen. For nearly 40 years, the truth remained buried. Until November 2024, when the Russian Federal Space Agency declassified selected documents. Not all of them. Not the final images. Not the full transcripts. Just enough to acknowledge something unusual had occurred. The official statement accompanying the declassification. During the 1985 Vega mission to Venus, atmospheric probes detected unexpected atmospheric structures of unknown origin. Investigation was inconclusive. No further Venus atmospheric missions have been approved pending additional research. But researchers analyzing the declassified materials noticed something else, a pattern in the data. The structures the Vega balloon had encountered were not unique. Similar formations have been detected, briefly, partially, by multiple Venus missions over the decades. Soviet, American, European, Japanese. Every time, the data is explained away as atmospheric phenomena, lightning, cloud formations, instrument malfunction. But the pattern is consistent and growing. With each new mission, the structures appear more frequently, closer to the probes, more interested, as if they're waiting, learning, preparing. Venus orbits the Sun every 225 days. Earth orbits every 365. The two planets align, coming to their closest approach every 19 months. We are entering one of those alignment periods now, and there are proposals. Multiple space agencies, plans for new Venus missions, atmospheric probes, balloon platforms, some even suggesting crewed missions to Venus's upper atmosphere, where conditions are surprisingly Earth-like if you can survive the sulfuric acid. The engineers designing these missions have not been briefed on the Vega incident. The data remains too classified. The images remain locked away. But Irina Volkov, now 78 years old, living in a small village outside Moscow, was contacted by journalists after the declassification. Asked if she had any comment on the newly released documents. Her response, given via written statement, "We should not return to Venus. What lives there has allowed us our brief observations, because we are irrelevant to them. We are microbes looking at whales. But if we persist, if we return with more capable instruments, if we try to study them seriously, they will notice, and we will not survive their attention. They are not part of the ancient network. They are older, stranger. They exist in ways we cannot comprehend, and they should be left alone." When asked what she meant by the ancient network, she refused to elaborate, but analysis of her statement suggests she's aware of other anomalous discoveries in the solar system. Other presences, other watchers. The implication is clear. We are not dealing with a single alien civilization. We are dealing with multiple presences, different eras, different purposes, different levels of interest in humanity. The ancient network, the teaching facilities on Europa and the Moon, the boundary markers on asteroids, the quarantine systems on Oumuamua, those are comprehensible. Those want us to learn, to graduate, to prove ourselves. But Venus is different. Venus is inhabited by something that does not teach, does not test, does not care. Venus belongs to intelligences so alien that observing them damages human consciousness. And they have been there, floating in those acidic clouds, for eons before we existed. The Vega balloon saw them, and 3 people died because they couldn't unsee. The footage remains classified. The final 7 images locked away in Russian archives, protected not by national security concerns, but by basic human safety. Some things should not be seen. Some places should not be explored. Some neighbors should not be disturbed. Venus is one of those places, and they are watching to see if we're wise enough to leave them alone. The Russian Federal Space Agency has not approved any Venus atmospheric missions since 1985. There is a reason for that.